Hello YouTube, my name is Adze, and today we're watching Royalty is Here's video, The Most Controversial Vocaloid, and I can tell just by the thumbnail it's about Kasane Teto. So a little bit of background, I am what I would call a casual Vocaloid fan. I like Vocaloids in general. Well, I like the music, I should say. I don't really know anything about the lore or the community or anything besides that, so this is going to be a lot of interesting to me, because I genuinely didn't even know Kasane Teto was controversial at all. I just knew that, I liked some of the music made with that particular Vocaloid. I mean, Tetoris is a banger, let's be honest, but I also like Royalty is Here. I'm very curious to see how this ends up going, and for those watching on stream right now, I'll be leaving a link in the chat. For those watching on the highlights channel, I will be leaving a link in the description. Please do go support the original creator. Let's go. Just a quick reminder that you're watching the Highlights channel right now. If you want to catch these streams live or want to check out my more high-effort analytical content, consider checking out the main channel linked in the description.
So Vocaloids, they seem to have got a lot more attention this past decade, with the main source of said attention mainly coming from the most popular Vocaloid. Yes, believe it or not, there are other Vocaloids, like a lot, and there used to be more, but some of them have actually become lost media due to the fact they aren't supported anymore.
That's interesting, I didn't know that. I mean, again, I'm not that well versed in Vocaloid stuff, especially not the really niche stuff, but it's interesting that nobody archived these things, because you think it's, essentially software used to generate a synthetic or mostly synthetic voice. I know they usually do have a real voice as a baseline, but I'm surprised even the niche ones just are gone.
So they've kind of been left to die or experience something similar to the singular Hexbug fan that still exists, where they are basically the only one keeping the memory of said product alive even after it's been forgotten and even renamed. But as I was saying, people mostly associate the name Vocaloid with a singular blue-haired, leek-wielding cultural icon, recently divorced clanker, Hatsune Miku, or as she's most commonly known, the Fortnite character that rode on the back of Godzilla to fight a giant squid man with the support of the Avengers.
I'll be honest, so Fortnite just confuses me nowadays, because when it first started getting popularity, I played a few rounds with a couple friends, realized it wasn't for me, and then never touched it again, and was only vaguely aware of it because it was everywhere for a while. I have no idea what the fuck has happened to it. Like, it looks unrecognizable compared to the last time I saw it. I have no idea what the fuck is going on.
Squid Game characters, Invincible cast, and the Mutant Ninja Turtles. Honestly, at this point, I would not blame you if you're starting to suspect you're having a schizophrenic episode, experiencing a delusion where there is a timeline where this does actually exist, but here we are. But Hatsune Miku is definitely the most recognizable Vocaloid, with almost 3.5 million listeners a month. I
wonder how they quantify that, because, it's not, as much as they're posturing the Vocaloids as if they're individual idols, at the end of the day, they're musical instruments. So it's not like there's just one single creator, Hatsune Miku. There's a bunch of people using Hatsune Miku to create songs. So I wonder how they're quantifying and tallying all the viewers for all the different Hatsune Miku songs. Probably doesn't really matter, but it is interesting.
Has her own concerts, which I must say are a lot more impressive than that one VTuber concert I saw. She's had a successful...
Yeah, that's weird. Okay, so I have not watched any VTuber concerts. That's just not something I've done at this point. I'm not necessarily against the idea, just because I know there are a lot of VTubers who are genuinely good singers. But, I feel like you could do better than that, right?
Legacy in media and the internet in general since her conception in 2007, and some of you that have probably started developing crow's feet may even remember when every Nightcore song back in the day would always have a picture of Miku present for some reason.
Yeah, that was a weird era of music online where, I mean, I know Nightcore is still a thing, but it is kind of strange how a big chunk of the internet just kind of collectively agreed that, hey, let's speed up songs and put an anime girl on them and pretend it's not copyright infringement.
Again, if you remember this image and the song that goes along with it, you are in fact considered old now. And it's time to get that 30-year mortgage with outrageous interest rates that you'll never pay off, buddy. And you might not...
a mortgage in this economy? Come on. So I live in New Jersey, which is a expensive place, high cost of living. So I cannot afford any houses near me. It's crazy. There's I think a 2-bedroom house not far from where I live. Granted, it's in a particularly desirable location, but that 1 or 2-bedroom house, single story, is fucking $400,000 on the market right now. It's yeah, no, I'm not getting any mortgages right now, at least not until the housing bubble bursts, because I do think that's probably imminent. But yeah.
Know this, but especially if you are old, you may have already listened to Miku and her voice before without knowing. Because if you've ever seen the very old meme Nyanka, Miku was behind the original version of the song used.
I did not know that, but honestly, thinking back, it does make sense. I can hear it now, because to me, the memories of Nyanka and Hatsune Miku are just completely separate in my mind. But now that I think about it, I'm yeah, that is her voice. Holy shit, that just kind of blew my mind. God damn.
But as said, Vocaloids have been a thing for a while now, and mainly got popular due to the introduction of Hatsune Miku and the music that followed. However, with all that said, what is a Vocaloid? Well, to keep it brief, Vocaloids are the product of the Volaloid software created by Yamaha Corporation, who also make things like motorbikes and ATVs, but the software...
And they do make musical instruments too. The Yamaha keyboards are pretty well known. It is a weird combination of products, but Yamaha is established in the music industry, so it's not that weird that they would create the Volaloid software.
Allows someone to make music by typing the lyrics of a song and using voice banks, which are samples of human vocals, that can be manipulated in a way to provide a voice to said lyrics. That's why most of the time Vocaloids and their music sound sort of robotic. In fact, the voice of Hatsune Miku was sampled from Saki Fujita.
And I will say, one thing I do actually find interesting about Vocaloids in general is that I feel again, I don't never use the software myself. I'm not a musician, anything like that, but I've noticed some Vocaloids or some creators are able to make the Vocaloids sound more human than others, and some are able to actually use the inhuman nature of the Vocaloids to their advantage. It is very interesting because I've noticed if you've heard the song Teto, which we're talking about Kazana Teto in this video. Teto sounds not quite human, but a lot closer than most Vocaloids do, and honestly a lot closer than most other Kazama Teto songs do. So it's an interesting thing. I would be curious to learn a little bit more about that.
By owning and making the software, Yamaha does not own the rights to Miku. She's actually owned by Krypton Future Media, and what makes a Vocaloid an official Vocaloid is that 1, it must be created in the Vocaloid official software, although even though the company that owns Miku are no longer using it and have gone on to make their own software, Miku is still considered a Vocaloid primarily due to the license provided by Yamaha Corporation, which is another thing required so you can actually label your product as a Vocaloid.
That's interesting. I wonder if that goes into what I was wondering earlier about how does he mentioned 3.1 million monthly listeners. How do they tally all that just because this is all made by different creators? Again, it's not like there's one artist named Hatsune Miku. It's basically a bunch of artists using what is essentially the instrument Hatsune Miku.
And is a lot of work and money, which is why only professional companies like Krypton Future Media own a majority of the Vocaloids we see today, with only a select few other companies having their own Vocaloids like Shanghai Henan IT. And you also have to worry about things like designing and potentially creating your own professional voice banks, which a normal person may not have the resources for. But even if you went through that entire process and didn't get the license, your product still wouldn't be considered a Vocaloid, but a Utaloid, which if you say a few times in succession, it sounds like a slur for Vocaloids. So Utaloids are basically the poor person's version of a Vocaloid.
You could say it sounds like a slur. I was gonna say it sounds like an STD.
If you don't want to fork out an extortionate amount of money for a license to the official software, or spin the wheel and risk getting a totally free and legitimate version that only comes with a trade-off of your webcam light permanently being on, and command prompt flashing you every time you start Windows, and let's not forget once again the copious amounts of funding and effort you'd need to put in just to get the Yamaha license to call it a Vocaloid. But Utaloid or UTAU is like a non-official or non-canonical Vocaloid, mainly produced by the community and is usually created within the free software UTAU Studio, using free or creating their own voice banks that can be put into the software directly.
Okay, so one thing I find interesting, they say you can't call it a Vocaloid if you don't get a license from Yamaha. So I wonder, because I wonder if that's a copyright or a trademark thing. Because at this time, right, as of now, the term Vocaloid is becoming a more generic term. It's not referencing something specific really anymore. I mean, he mentioned that there's the term Utaloid, or Utaloid, probably, since Japanese. But it's just, if it's a trademark, it's probably gotten to the point where it's considered a generic term, and that trademark is probably unenforceable at this point, at least in the United States. Because the way U.S. Trademark law works, where it's actually kind of dumb, where you kind of have to defend your trademark in the legal sense in order to keep the trademark, because once a trademark becomes generic, like it becomes the common usage of the term, and other products start using it and that kind of thing, and it's no longer associated with your product specifically, you actually lose the trademark to it. That's why I'm trying to think of examples off the top of my head, but I can think of stuff that's in common usage. But there are a bunch of products out there that their generic term was originally the brand name. Like I think aspirin is one of them, where you can just call things aspirin, even though it's not the actual drug name. It was the original brand name. It's just it lost its trademark because it became so commonplace that it became the generic term for it. So I wonder if Vocaloid could go the same way. If it's a copyright thing, that's different, because copyright has different rules.
Hence the name Utaloid, which also has been used as a label for any non-official Vocaloid like Fananoids, even if they don't use the UTAU software, but for simplicity's sake, all of them usually all come under the umbrella of Vocaloid, official or not. Now obviously there are a lot more Utaloids than there are Vocaloids, primarily due to the fact the bar to label your product a Utaloid is a lot lower than...
Yeah, I'm gonna be honest, I've never heard of any of these characters, like any of these Utaloids. I mean, again, I still would call them Vocaloids just because that seems like the generic term, but like, yeah, granted, I'm not all that knowledgeable about this stuff anyway. I've only really heard stuff from the most popular ones, but still, you'd think I would at least have heard some of these names before, but I just haven't.
The requirements for a Vocaloid, and once again, Utaloids are community made, and usually all you need to create a Utaloid is a visual design, software, and a voice bank. But Utaloids have existed around about just as long as Vocaloids, and some are even on the same level or just as popular as their official counterparts.
Okay.
With
on the same level, I can believe. Because there's always going to be a bunch of talented people in the general public who are not necessarily big names in whatever industry they're looking at, which is why, you can find, really talented documentarians on YouTube that rival professional documentarians. And honestly, I think a lot of times the ones on YouTube are actually better than the ones that are produced by professional studios. So it wouldn't surprise me that there are people who create these Vocaloids or Utaloids that are able to rival the real deal. Popularity does kind of surprise me, again, just because I only really have heard of... Because, when it comes to Vocaloid stuff, I'm basically a normie. I've heard some songs. I don't mind. I like the sounds in general, but I'm not super familiar with them. But I've not really heard of any Utaloids in the same conversation as the big Vocaloids.
Examples being Defoco, made in 2008, Momo Momon, also made in 2008, Renri Yamin, released initially in 2014, there's also Neru, released in 2007, but they are considered a
I think I've heard that name before, but I don't know if I know any of the songs.
Derivative, not an official Vocaloid or Utaloid, because she doesn't have her own voice bank and she was heavily based off Miku, with her nickname actually being Yellow Miku. And probably the most popular, and who this video is about, is Kasane Teto, or just Teto as she's usually known, who in the community is mostly respected and regarded as an official Vocaloid despite officially not being one.
Okay, that's interesting. I didn't know that Teto wasn't actually a Vocaloid, because, again, I do hear about her kind of in the same conversation as all the big Vocaloids, and honestly, lately, I've noticed she's actually become a lot more prevalent than some of the other big Vocaloids. I mean, granted, I don't think any Vocaloid's going to eclipse Miku anytime soon, but, I mean, I hear about Teto a lot more than things like, the Kagamine twins, or... Oh, shit, what the fuck are their names? I think Gakpo is one of them. I don't know. I'm trying to think back to, because I'm trying to think back to some of the songs I've heard, but yeah, Teto's in the same conversation as the big ones, and so I actually thought she was one of the main Vocaloids, but I'm actually kind of surprised to learn she's not.
Currently she has a fanbase that almost rivals Hatsune Miku herself, and even more recently Teto has become increasingly popular due to her involvement in multiple memes and shitposts.
Man, I'm gonna break my monitor, I swear!
Especially those that could be seen as controversial, to say the least, that I've been seeing on my Instagram reels.
Okay. Do you think it was very fucking cool? Yes, I do. One of the and I'm tired of pretending he's not.
Which altogether...
It's one of those things where, my stance on edgy jokes, which I've talked about before, but is I think just about anything is fair game. Just the edgier you are, the funnier you have to be to justify it. That one was not very funny. I think the idea is there. The execution was not. At the very least, you gotta have some better comedic timing than that.
Has led to Teto having a huge effect on the Vocaloid community, even if she is still a Utaloid. But where did Teto come from, and how did she have such an impact on the Vocaloid community and the internet as a whole? To the point where she actually has a demonic-like cult surrounding her.
Teto word of the day!
Yeah, and I'll be honest, I don't really understand I mean, I know that Vocaloids and Utaloids, I'm just gonna call them Vocaloids just for the sake of simplicity. But I noticed Vocaloids do kind of have individual fan bases because they're styled after J-pop idols. But at the end of the day, they are functionally instruments. They are tools used to create music, and they can be used by different people. So I find it just so fascinating that individual Vocaloids can have passionate fan bases. Because I can believe you might prefer one Vocaloid over another just because you just like the sound, maybe you like the character design on top of that, but it's interesting to me to actually have, because if you look at Hatsune Miku, two of her songs, there's, the Ivan Polka, which is, I mean, that was originally a cover of, I believe, a Finnish song, but, Ivan Polka was a big Hatsune Miku song, and then more recently they had Confessions of a Rotten Girl, another great song. It's the same kind of, quote-unquote voice singing, but it was two different artists creating that, and I completely can believe that you could be a fan of one without being a fan of the other. So I'll be honest, again, maybe I'm just a Vocaloid normie, which, I mean, not maybe, I definitely am, but I just really do not understand being a passionate fan of a specific Vocaloid.
Tom, why do you still not have a Tom? Go outside and get it off!
So the story of how Teto came to be is kind of a funny one, as she was originally created in 2008 by the users of a Japanese forum page called 2channel. Around this time, Miku had just been introduced to the world and was making waves on the internet, so the residents of the forum page 2channel in April decided to make their own April Fool's joke.
So I'm not surprised that Teto is an older one, back when Miku was first getting popular. So it doesn't surprise me that Teto was made at that point, just because I know how popular she is. Because again, even as a normie myself, or at least a Vocaloid normie, that's kind of the one area I am actually a normie. But yeah, even from my relative outsider's perspective, I've always kind of been aware of Teto because she's always kind of been in the same conversation as the other big Vocaloids.
which was to make their own version of a fake Vocaloid, which led to the birth of the red-haired gremlin Teto. They went as far as to provide an entire concept of the fake Vocaloid for the prank, with an artist by the name of Sen providing the artwork for Teto, which bore a heavy resemblance to Miku in a way from her outfit to numbers present.
Kinda? I mean, yeah, I mean, it's the numbers on the arm would kind of be the big seller for me, but... And, you know, I guess kind of when you put them side by side, I can kind of see it. But you kind of have to point that out to me, because, again, I feel like they are very unique characters designs. Like, they're separate from one another, so I don't quite agree that they're, like, that similar.
On her arm, but with key differences like the hairstyle and the colour. Soon users of the forum page would also attach both lore and details to the character, which was also heavily involved in the prank and resulted in Teto officially being 31 years old, which is the youngest age for your average old school RuneScape player. She was also nor female nor male, she was instead a chimera. And yes, I did start that sentence by saying she, because most just refer to her as female because of her character design. But also, unlike Miku, instead of being obsessed with leaks...
Well, and aside from just the character design, there's the fact that Teto uses a female voice. That's a factor as well.
Her character design. But also, unlike Miku, instead of being obsessed with leeks, she was obsessed with bread, mostly baguettes. And we were very fortunate the users of 2channel decided to grant some mercy with their troll and didn't make her French.
French!
They also provided her personality, which was apparently a tsundere, and that she dislikes people that think her pigtails are drills. And to tie the ribbon on their April Fool's joke, they made a whole website dedicated to the bit that appeared like an official page announcing the debut of this new Vocaloid Teto. The online prank did succeed. A lot of people thought there was actually going to be another Vocaloid, and some even became
Okay, so that's interesting that I don't know. I feel like it's just not that stretch to think that you might create all this, and it's a very elaborate thing. But, like, it wouldn't be that ridiculous for somebody to create a voice bank to go along with that. And then, that would kind of almost diffuse the prank just because all of a sudden the fake Vocaloid now actually has everything that a real Vocaloid does. So what's the point of the fake?
Highly interested in this character even after they found out it was a joke. But after April Fool's, Teto was basically abandoned, as the majority of 2channel users moved on as they had already done what they set out to accomplish and the joke was over. Even though they put so much effort into it and the product of said joke was a very believable and somewhat competent design. However, Teto wouldn't just be thrown in the trash and have her story end there. Because as said, some were interested in the character and refused to let Teto just be tossed aside as a one-time joke. 13 days after April Fool's, Teto would get her first voice bank made by a fan for the Utah software, and the voice behind it was Mayo Oyamano, who frequented the 2channel forum, and at the time was only 15 years old when she decided to volunteer as the voice of Teto.
Okay, that's interesting, because again, I've heard Kasane Teto music before. I wouldn't have guessed that the singer behind it was only 15 years old at the time. That's pretty impressive, because one thing I will say, for as artificial as Vocaloid music can sound sometimes, you generally do need to have a pretty competent singer behind it to get a solid bass line because otherwise, once you get into the software and start manipulating that voice, if there's any kind of imperfections to it, it can really fuck shit up. Like, it can make things a little bit more difficult to work with. So, for a 15-year-old singer to be able to be on the mark enough to actually make a competent Vocaloid, or, again, I'm calling him Vocaloid just for the sake of simplicity, but, that actually indicates a pretty competent singer.
And with the voice bank created and provided to the community, Teto had now evolved from a joke to an official Utaloid, and soon after the first song would be made with her voice bank called Fake Diva, which used both Teto's and Miku's voice bank to make the song. And this song saw a decent amount of attention, with each re-upload at least getting over 100,000 views. And within 6 months of her release, there were hundreds of uploaded videos made about her on the site Nico Nico, which is a Japanese video sharing website like YouTube, and people began using her voice bank to create their own music or create covers of existing songs with it. In fact, Teto received so much attention that eventually a fan-founded management group called Twin Drill was made specifically to manage the intellectual property that is Teto. And with
Okay, that's interesting. I'm wondering who actually owns the rights to the IP of Teto, because if it was a kind of a community project and it was essentially made as a collective joke, I'm not sure anyone actually has the rights to claim Kasane Teto as their own property. So, you know, this fake management, or not fake management company, but this new management company, I don't know if they can actually claim any kind of real ownership over Kasane Teto, because she might essentially be the equivalent of public domain, or effectively public domain. Even if there is somebody who technically owns the copyright to it, it's probably almost impossible to prove that they own the copyright. Whoever created the design in the first place is probably the one who would legally own the copyright. But how can anyone prove that they were this one who specifically designed it when it was essentially a community project that was done in the public eye? So that's interesting. The voice bank, you probably could pin down who owns the voice of Kasane Teto, but not necessarily the character itself. So I'm curious as to how this management company is going to essentially assert their own ownership of it. Or maybe they're just trying to basically do marketing and not act as a real owner, but kind of posture themselves as the authority for marketing purposes, basically.
Said group included the 2-channel users that provided the voice and art for her April release. She would then in 2009 receive an update to her voice bank, upgrading the quality of her voice where it previously sounded like this, and it was now upgraded to this.
Okay, yeah, that's the voice I recognize now, because before, that earlier voice has a lot of reverb on it. I wonder if that's just the way they made that song in particular, but the actual quality of the Vocaloid itself did not sound quite as good, so it does seem like she got a bit of a facelift in the voice.
Upgraded to this. This was definitely a bit better than the original, but this upgrade may have indirectly helped spread Teto throughout the Western world, as Teto was only really being noticed in Japan up to this point, and she hadn't really been introduced to any other country.
Well, I mean, to be fair, back then, Vocaloids weren't as popular in the West as they are today. I mean, there was definitely a growing niche fan base of them, because I remember even before I became a weeb, there was a period of time where there was some Vocaloid stuff that was kind of piercing general otaku culture, because again, as much as I wasn't a weeb, I did know weebs, and also there's just some stuff that would even pierce through that, like if you remember Mothy's music on the 7 Deadly Sins, that was one of the few things that actually came across my radar well before I became a weeb, because I actually did enjoy those. So again, yeah, I mean, Vocaloid stuff was growing at the time, but it also wasn't super popular, and definitely not as popular as it is today, because as Royalty is here said earlier in the video, in the past decade or so, it really has seen a major boom.
The now updated voice bank that sounded better, a lot more people began to use her, leading to the creation of one of her more viral songs, Teto Territory.
No, I don't recognize that one.
The song was basically about who Teto was, her likes, dislikes, and her ultimate goal to become a Vocaloid, and how she's going to overthrow the monopoly on Vocaloids. Along with the upbeat animation, particularly Teto dancing, it quickly garnered a lot of attention, mostly outside of Japan.
And one thing he did mention briefly of how she's going to essentially, he mentioned that she's going to break the monopoly on Vocaloids. That is an interesting idea, because I didn't realize that all the big Vocaloids were owned by the same people. Again, I just didn't know the details behind what Vocaloids really were as far as the commercial side of things. So the fact that actually all the big ones are owned by the same people, having a major independent competitor to that, I think is actually pretty significant. Because while there are, again, a bunch of voices you can make, and it's a lot more accessible than it used to be to create one of these, yeah, I think it is probably healthy for the industry if it's not just one company having control over all of them, even if they are licensing them out fairly freely.
It even became somewhat of a meme back then, with people making their own version of her dance. Now at this point more people knew about Teto, but it didn't stop there. as another fan would make the song Fugareta in 2010, which also got a lot of attention,
I don't know that one
and
either.
for some reason also became nostalgia bait for most people alive in the 2010s, and like its predecessor, it also found its way into internet culture at the time. Gradually over the years, Teto would continue to grow influence, and with the release of even more fan-made music and her previous success on the internet, it was almost impossible to ignore the influence Teto was gathering. She wasn't on the same level as Miku at that time, but she was present, and this led to her in 2014 being finally officially noticed by Krypton Future Media, and they would involve her in an official Vocaloid project. It was just that in said project, she was kind of there in the background.
Hey, that's my shoulder.
She was added as a DLC in the game Hatsune Miku Project Diva, but she was just...
Yeah, I've heard... I've never played that game, but I have heard about it. Yeah.
Just a playable character. She had no voice lines and her voice bank was not used at all.
That's interesting to me. You know, from my understanding, that's a a music-based game. Why would you have a recognizable musical character in a music-based game and not use any of the music? That just does not compute for me.
But at least she finally received some form of official recognition. However, past 2014, Teto would struggle a little, as would most Vocaloids. This was known as the Great Stagnation Era, or as it's alternatively known within the community, the Dry Period. This is where Vocaloids in general no longer saw the same growth they were experiencing in previous years. It was kind of the same thing Minecraft faced from 2014 to 2017, but this was primarily due to factors like a lot of influential Vocaloid content creators in the space going on to other adventures outside the Vocaloid community.
That doesn't surprise me, actually, because I can imagine that at the time, Vocaloid was probably considered a pretty substantial niche, but also one that would limit you as a musician, as a musical artist, if you decided to stick with it too much. Again, just kind of playing playing a... He mentioned the Minecraft comparison. So if you're a content creator playing a video game, even a popular one, you could potentially lock yourself into that too hard if the game is not big enough to really sustain a massive mainstream appeal. So I can imagine Vocaloid's kind of being the same thing, where you're kind of locked into the niche of Vocaloid fans if you continue making Vocaloid music, and you kind of lock yourself out of people who aren't specifically fans of Vocaloids and in general fans of music. So that does kind of make sense to me.
Not only that, but they apparently saw an oversaturation problem, because things looked so promising years prior, it led to the overproduction of new characters and voice banks, to the point where there were so many, a lot of them just failed to get any traction. In general, it looked like Vocaloids had become a dated trend, and the hype for them was over, and it would just slowly fade into obscurity. A good indication of this was with the release of a Miku song called Sand Planet, which some interpreted as a reference to the decline of Vocaloids.
Yeah, well, one thing I do think is kind of important when it comes to something like a Vocaloid, if you don't want it to just be a flash in the pan or a passing trend, I mean, there's got to be actual quality, innovative music using it. You got to make music with the Vocaloids that you couldn't necessarily make with regular human voices. And again, I know that Vocaloids are based on actual human voices, but again, like if it's not used in a unique way, which I think nowadays it is. A lot of the Vocaloid stuff I've heard creates unique sounds to it that you couldn't necessarily replicate with a regular voice unless you heavily modulated them. But again, if you're not using the unique features that the sound offers to make unique music, it's gonna kind of end up being just a gimmick. And while it may be a popular gimmick, it will fade away after a while. Because again, the part that attracts you to... the gimmick of Vocaloid is essentially like, a thumbnail on YouTube. It's kind of what entices you, what might get you in the door, but it's the actual quality behind it that'll keep you there.
Teto around this time was still around. She had a few popular song releases and even apparently a feature in a production, and was once again involved in another DLC pack in 2016, but she saw the same struggle other Vocaloids were seeing at that time. But despite the Vocaloid community going through a difficult time, she was officially featured in the Hatsune Miku Symphony concert in 2018 and 2019, which also celebrated the 10-year anniversary of Teto, and she was one of the only non-Vocaloid characters present.
Okay.
But still, Vocaloids had seemingly hit their peak, and it was only downhill from there. And it started to look like this was just a temporary trend where they would just be discarded and forgotten by the end of it. Well, it may have been like that if the second golden age of Vocaloids didn't come about. As in late 2019 to early 2020, perhaps due to the release of things like multiple Vocaloid-themed games and the rise of short-form content
Yeah, and I will say that rhythm games just do seem to be kind of the perfect spot for Vocaloids to thrive. I mean, not just because, I mean, they have a very electronic sound to them in general. There's obviously going to be exceptions to that, but you know, because of the electronic sound that Vocaloids do have, it's basically the perfect fit for a rhythm game. So I'm not surprised that rhythm games were kind of a big part of revitalizing the fan base of Vocaloids, and also the fact that their visuals, again, just they kind of have built-in visuals that work with rhythm games. But yeah, so I was going to say something else. I completely lost my train of thought.
Release of things like multiple Vocaloid-themed games and the rise of short-form content platforms like TikTok, the community began to pick up again and create more Vocaloid content.
Yeah, and actually short-form content does make sense to me as well, because, again, I'm not a short-form content creator. I've never really dove into that. It is a thing that creatively I think I would find interesting. It's just between putting all the effort into making consistent short form content to the level I would want to make it would be a lot of effort, and that would kind of take away from the long form stuff that I prefer to do. But one thing I have noticed is that, you know, catchy, punchy hooks, and when it comes to music, are what work in short form content usually. And Vocaloid does tend to have that kind of quality to it. Or even if it doesn't, it has the potential to have that type of quality. So that makes sense to me.
Specific creators like Pino, Deco, Giga, and Maretu being popular examples. This introduced more people to both Miku and Vocaloids once again, and content started rolling out. But Teto wouldn't share that spotlight till a bit later on, as her voice...
again, I'm not a super deep Vocaloid fan. I haven't heard a lot from the Kagamina twins in a hot minute. So I wonder, are they still kind of on top? Because, again, the music that happens to come across my recommended feed usually doesn't include them. And honestly, there are a lot of the older voices I'm not really seeing much from them. I'm sure people are still using them, but they just don't seem to be as much in the spotlight anymore, which, I don't know. Some of the old ones I do like. In particular, I would like to see more Gumi music, because I actually do like the sound of that Vocaloid quite a bit.
Rolling out, but Teto wouldn't share that spotlight till a bit later on, as her voice bank at this point was very old. It did receive some upgrades here and there, but overall it was quite dated compared to other voice banks and Vocaloids.
Well, that's interesting, because wouldn't Miku probably fall into the same thing? Because Miku is older than Teto. Granted, she's run by a company. The company probably does release periodic upgrades to the voice bank just to keep it kind of technologically on top, especially with that Miku being the most popular one of the Vocaloids, that they would really want to put their resources and attention into it. But wouldn't they kind of suffer from the same issue, essentially? Because, again, as much as, you know, Miku, I mean, Teto did get some voice upgrades, so did Miku, so, yeah, I just don't know if that would be a factor or not.
She wasn't completely discarded, she was used here and there, but she was slowly being forgotten. Until in 2023, where she would receive a professional update to her voice bank as an addition to the Synthesizer Studio, which also came with an update to her appearance. And thus Teto, once again like in 2008 to 2010, would capture the eyes of the community, as her voice was a lot more human now and higher quality.
Yeah, I will say that is one thing I have noticed, is that of all the major Vocaloids out there, Teto is one of the ones that consistently sounds the most human. It depends on what the use is. There's definitely some that don't sound very human. But like if you listen to something like Tetoris, it does sound only like you would be forgiven for mistaking Tetoris as being sung by like an actual person.
And some people had an absolute field day with her new voice bank.
Your life is nothing. You serve a zero purpose. You should kill yourself now.
But this improvement resulted...
I'll be honest. When I clicked on this video and decided to watch it, you could not have had me guess in a million years that there was going to be a fucking low-tier god meme in there. Just, holy shit.
In her being heavily used with popular songs like Override and more recently Mesmerizer, which was a combination between Teto and Miku and reached over 180 million views. And after this, she would join Miku on stage performing the same song for the Hatsune Miku Japan live tour in 2025. Yes,
yeah,
Teto
and I will say, this is,
you
know, earlier he was talking about the VTuber concerts and how they're not, he said the one he saw was not very good, and the clip he showed was not very good as well. I feel like VTuber concerts kind of need to do what Vocaloid concerts do if they want to really kind of get to the same level of appeal. Because when you're just kind of having the 2D model, an image of the 2D model singing like they're on stream, that kind of is a waste of potential. I feel like at that point you kind of have to have like a 3D model doing stuff on stage to really capture people the same way the Vocaloid concerts do. And that should be feasible ultimately, because there are 3D projection softwares out there nowadays, and hardware, of course. You do need the hardware for that. Like, what they at some point got to do is have a 3D model for a VTuber musician, essentially have them somewhere backstage with a mocap suit on, and just hook it up to the 3D model and have them perform that way. I think it would be expensive, but I think that's completely viable, and it's probably the direction that VTuber concerts kind of need to go if they want to have massive sticking power beyond just the VTuber fans.
And live tour in 2025. Yes, Teto was created as an April Fool's joke towards Vocaloids in 2008 and was completely community made and then somewhat discarded after the joke was over, but in the current day is now currently somewhat on the same level as the face of Vocaloids, Hatsune Miku. She has rightfully earned the name Diva born from a hoax. They grow up so fast. But that is where Teto is to this day. And as you can probably tell, the name of this video is the most controversial Vocaloid.
Yeah, that's the thing. While this history has been very interesting, I'm still completely unaware of any controversy she's been in. And it does sound like, she's created on... the name sounds very similar to like making it Japanese 4chan. Also, I will say, this thumbnail fucking slaps. Like, it's great. That's one of the things that, even if it wasn't a Royalty Is Here video, and I know of Royalty Is Here, I like his videos, that thumbnail would have caught my eye. Good thumbnail.
It's probably something like that. I'm not very good with titles, if you couldn't tell. I mostly just pull them from my ass, all the way from the depths of my prostate.
Relatable.
But
I am exactly the same way with a lot of my titles, especially when I'm talking about a more nuanced subject. And I think that is one area. I mean, my thumbnails also need work, but titles are one area that I definitely need to improve a little bit. Because, yeah, if it's not an obvious thing I can say, sometimes my titles just do not do the job.
Is Teto the most controversial Vocaloid? Well, there's a bit of contention within the community if Teto should be called a Vocaloid, especially considering her past and her overall conception. Some vehemently defend the point she isn't a Vocaloid as she still isn't considered official,
and I get that point, but at this point in time, if you're not kind of ingratiated into the community and like a big fan of Vocaloids specifically and really kind of involved in that side of things, most people are going to, on the outside, are going to be using the umbrella term of Vocaloid. I'm someone who is in that camp. I am outside of the major fan base. I just call everything a Vocaloid because that's kind of become the generic term. And again, if it's a trademark and not a copyright, which would not surprise me, if it sounds more like something that would be a trademark than copyright. At this point, in the United States at least, I don't know how Japanese trademark law works, but in the United States, they probably do not have a valid trademark, or at least not one that would hold up if it was challenged. So Vocaloid at this point can just become the generic term, I think. So, I mean, I get the idea of wanting to argue the semantics of this thing, because in some cases I am the same way, but at this point, I think that's probably a losing battle.
There has apparently been a bit of gatekeeping in the community against those that were introduced to Vocaloids through Teto, despite her once again not being a Vocaloid, and some treat it like she's encroaching on Miku's territory or something. But on the other side, people refer to her as a Vocaloid for either simplicity or out of some sort of respect, as she was originally this one-off joke, but is now almost on par with the face of Vocaloid's Hatsune Miku, getting the Vocaloid treatment and is basically everywhere. She's constantly being acknowledged by the powerhouses of the Vocaloid industry, perhaps to the dismay of people on the opposing side.
Yeah, and again, let's also not forget that they're mentioning the Vocaloid industry. Even that phrasing right there indicates that Vocaloid has become a generic term. So again, I mean, I get the idea of wanting to kind of make the distinction, but at this point, I do think that's just not a hill worth dying on.
Of the Vocaloid industry, perhaps to the dismay of people on the opposing side. She was even recently in a McDonald's ad, and it was heavily rumoured she's going to be eventually added to Fortnite.
That doesn't,
yes, I know.
That would not surprise me, just because, again, Fortnite is like unrecognizable to me now, because again, I played a few games back when it got really popular, and just it wasn't for me, so I didn't continue with it. But it's like, they're adding everything in there now. Like, honestly, if they're adding fucking, like, Peter Griffin and Thanos into Fortnite, why wouldn't they add Kasane Teto?
Around a year ago, there was propaganda being sent around that she was getting added to Fortnite then, just for a majority of people to eventually realise they've been baited, but that rumour is once again being circulated, which is either god-tier gaslighting and they may have to create a hotline for Teto fans if it isn't true, or she is in fact going to be added just like Miku, which will further solidify her impact within the community.
I would not be surprised.
Another reason apart from her just simply being called a Vocaloid is down to the community surrounding her and her recent adoption as the face of shitposting.
Birthday!
Jesus Christ. That fucking flashbanged me. Holy shit. God damn. That is... I am actually lost for words. Holy shit.
Now, there's a few communities you don't fuck with, one of them being the Uma Musume community, because if you say anything even remotely negative about one of their horse girls, they will flail you alive on top of an open fire. Believe me.
I will say, I think... Oh, I remember the whole PETA thing. That was an interesting time. But I will say, I think I'm probably safe from the Uma Musume people, because I don't actually have anything negative to say about the characters. I just don't like gacha games. And I think that's a position that a lot of people can understand, even if you even talking to people who do like gacha games. I tell them, yeah, I'm not a fan of gacha games, and I'll even, if I want to be a little bit inflammatory, I'll say the admittedly true statement of, I've never seen a gacha game that was not made worse for being a gacha game. Like, I think any gacha game would be better if it was just made as in a non-gacha game. Even the gacha game players are like, you know what, I get it. So I feel like the Uma Musume people, again, while they are passionate, they're more passionate about the characters than about the fact that it's a gacha game. Because I was disappointed, because I did try out Pretty Derby when it first got a lot popularity here in the West. And I wanted to like it, because again, the characters are actually very compelling. I think it's an entertaining IP. But I can't do gacha. No matter what it is, I can't get into it, which is a shame, because I've heard a lot of gacha games have really good music and stories and stuff like that, but it's just gacha completely pushes me away.
PETA learned the hard way, and another community is Teto fans, as they are usually described as very deranged or gremlins. From the contraptions they've made to the sheer amount of meme posts that some think have crowded the Vocaloid community to the point where you cannot escape them, I mean, how do you think I found out about Teto? It got to the point where it apparently overflowed out of the Vocaloid circle into my Instagram Reels feed.
And it is funny, I do like, one thing I noticed about Royalty is here, is that when it comes to weeb stuff, he almost gets kind of forcibly introduced to it. Like, I know he kind of is known in the VTuber community for a lot of the stuff he's done, and he's actually made some of the better videos discussing various VTuber history and controversies and stuff like that. And he basically was made into a VTuber person against his will. I can imagine that being the same thing with Vocaloids for him, because he seems to get kind of bullied into these niche spaces, and I kind of love it. I love the idea of somebody getting bullied into a fan base instead of being bullied out of one. Like, that is such a strange thing, and it's funny that it keeps happening to this fucking bird in particular.
But it has led to a bit of so-called Teto fatigue because she is all over the Vocaloid community, and some are starting to feel like she's overused. And let's not forget about the war crimes being committed with Teto on Instagram Reels, because, you know, it's Instagram Reels.
They don't understand the things I said on Twitter.
But yeah, Teto is controversial basically down to how she came about, to how she gathered enough influence to rival the titans in the industry, and because she became so popular it led to some infighting within the community regarding her title, and if she should be the one exception to that standard for said title.
Okay, and that is interesting to me, because as I mentioned earlier, just from my outsider's perspective on Vocaloids, because again, I'm not the biggest I call myself a casual Vocaloid fan because I like some of the music, but I'm not really involved in the community whatsoever. To me, Vocaloids are essentially musical instruments with visuals attached to them. So to me, like, hearing like, oh, Vocaloid fatigue or Teto fatigue, I'm like thinking, that's like, imagine there's like electric guitar fatigue. That's the same kind of thing for me. I can understand maybe the humanization element, the anthropomorphization of the character. I can understand that being a little bit tiring, but like, I feel like if you like the sound that the voice offers, which personally I do, it feels like as long as there are people who can make competent music using that sound, it's, you know, I feel like you can almost kind of ignore the rest.
And she's also viewed as controversial due to her Gremlin fans flooding the community with endless shitposts, to the point where the average Vocaloid fan will probably see a plethora of derogatory Teto memes on a daily basis.
Teto word of the day! Horse racing!
Now, I will say I am basically a tourist. Yes, string me up on the cross and call me a
Same
degenerate.
Here.
I will
honestly, he's probably less of a tourist than I am as far as Vocaloids go, because I didn't know any of this shit that he was talking about earlier. I just kind of knew that Vocaloids existed. I remember hearing a couple way back in the day, and now I occasionally listen to them on my commute to work.
Mate, I'm not that experienced in the ways of the Vocaloid. I'm quite the basic bitch. My favourite song is Echo and World Is Mine, but I can see why...
To be fair, Echo is an absolute banger. Like, again, I mentioned I Do Like Gumi, and yeah, Echo is... I even heard like a rock cover of Echo by, I want to say it's Demi Lancaster, I think. That was really good. But yeah, Echo is one of the ones I think is one of the better Vocaloid songs, in my opinion. Although that probably is partially because I just do like the sonic qualities of Gumi's voice. Because, you know, I don't know that I've heard very many songs by her that I don't like. So that could be a factor too. But yeah, Echo's a good choice.
People like Vocaloid so much, and why Teto is such a contested topic within the community, and why she is so loved. She isn't a traditional Vocaloid and had questionable origins, but that's probably the best part of Teto. She wasn't made by a corporation, she wasn't extensively planned, she was an April Fool's joke that became one of the top characters in the industry. And from the perspective of a tourist, I'd call her a Vocaloid even if it isn't an official title.
Yeah,
but
I'm in the same camp.
That's basically it. This is another video topic I found through my Instagram Reels feed. I hope a hex bug crawls under your foreskin, and yeah, that's all I had to say, and goodbye.
Well, fuck you too, Royalty. But yeah, okay, so that was interesting. So I thought it was going to be a little bit more about controversy specifically, but ultimately that was a really interesting history lesson on, you know, Vocaloids in general, but also Kasane Teto. That I didn't know like any of that going in. I really enjoyed that. That was a very good video, I think. I mean, Royalty Is Here generally doesn't miss. I don't think I've ever seen a video by Royalty Is Here that I didn't enjoy. That was no exception, certainly. So, again, for those watching in the stream, I'm going to be leaving a link in the chat. Please do support the original creator. For those watching on the highlights channel, the link will be in the description. Please do support the original creator because it is appreciated. He did a good job here. So, for those watching on the highlights channel again, thank you for sticking around this long, and I'll see you in a couple days for a new video.